Okay, there we go. So I know we do have a varied audience, but please indulge me. I just want to talk us through the oil and gas sector, as in the subsectors within, just briefly. And to the best of my understanding and from the way my organization sees things, the oil and gas sector can basically be portioned into three. We have the upstream, the midstream, and the downstream, and the components are presented. I'm sure you can see that. Because we have a very limited time, I will not talk in detail, but I hope as I do talk about the various structures, we will get an understanding of how organizations like us and other financial institutions are able to provide requisite financing for each of the subsectors. So what do we consider traditional financing in the upstream sector? The upstream sector is typically where we are looking at exploration and appraisal, and generally we consider it as anything before first oil is hit. And so we do have conventional ways in which financing can be streamed into that sector. When I say financing, it could be both debt and equity or a mixture of any other thing that comes in. So the conventional structures typically include equity, development finance, and development finance is normally tailored towards a very single assets and fields of single assets. Then we have the reserve-based lending, which more or less looks at a portfolio of assets. We have instruments maybe through the capital markets, so we can have people raising funds from corporate bonds and the lots, and then we also have corporate finance, which can be more short-term and be used for acquisition, working capital, and a whole range of other things. Short, so I don't know whether I can. Now, organizations like myself, beyond financing, we also have other ways of intervening in the upstream sector. And so we typically have project preparatory funds, which we normally use to take concepts to bankable stages. So we are able to provide both technical support and funding to take an idea, or at least when the appraisals are being done and we know that they need to do the preliminary works and studies, we're able to provide funding that can make some of those early developments and some of those early documents bankable. So institutions like ourselves typically want to intervene and provide that level of support. We are also able to provide advisory services, which can be tailored towards raising both debt and equity. And then we can also look at various things that are beyond the upstream direct financing, but related to other counterparties that benefit from the sector. And a few of that is listed here, where we are able to provide financing to related service companies for extraction of chemicals and renting of or leasing of heavy equipment and the lots. So in terms of the midstream and the downstream, I've actually put them together because the interventions and the financing approach, they are basically the same. But they do have a general characteristic similar to the upstream, where in terms of financing, it can be quite huge, and so there's always a huge capex requirement. So on the back of that, we typically require long-term financing, which we also consider capital market instruments for in some instances. We look at it as you can raise debt and equity to support that, and then you can also channel those funds into very specific things. Now, the reason why I want to dwell on some of the specifics for the midstream and the downstream is because a lot of the conversation that has taken place today has spoken about how the oil and gas is a value added, it's an opener to other sectors, and so people are able to get the benefits because we have an in-streaming of liquidity into the oil and gas sector. And so it's very important for you to understand that while we are looking at an oil and gas conference here and how we can get the benefit of it, there are also directly and indirectly related services that the country can benefit from. And one of that is infrastructure, the provision of infrastructure. To me, infrastructure basically means that as long as we have a very viable oil and gas sector, we are going to need processing infrastructure, we are going to need storage infrastructure, we are going to need evacuation infrastructure, pipelines are part of that, we are going to need transportation infrastructure. We've had a number of conversations here today about road infrastructure, about rail infrastructure, about seaports and terminals and the lots. Very, very fundamental when you have a viable oil and gas sector because it is an opener into developing some of these other infrastructural needs. We will also see the need for processing plants, and normally people are able to provide financing to support such. So you have refineries coming up, petrochemicals coming up, and natural gas plants also coming up. All of these are relatively long-term financing, but then we do have interventions that can also look at short-term financing, and some of them can be in terms of equipment financing and also financing specific assets such as the FPSOs and FSOs. Sorry, if I use acronyms that you're not familiar with, just let me know. Floating production storage and offshore vessels, and floating storage and offshore vessels are what I mean by FPSOs and FSOs. Okay. So I will be talking about my institution and what we do, but just before I get into that, I just wanted to emphasize that generally across the value chain of the oil and gas sector, because of the nature of the terms and the nature and the tenor of the funding that is typically required, we always see that banks come together to come and lend financing and to be able to at least support the industry. So I've said yes that banks may be able to come in and help in the equity raise. Banks may be able to come in and provide advisory services, but when we typically have debt financing, because of the huge capex costs involved, you typically would see international banks coming in with commercial banks. You'll also see, in a lot of instances, export credit agencies also coming to lend some level of support in that regard. More commonly, we are beginning to see an interest on the continent in Islamic banks coming in and pension funds also coming in to fund some of these long-term requirements for oil and gas sector. And then of course TFIs are like ourselves, or multilaterals like ourselves, also coming in either collaboratively or bilaterally, coming in to support the players in this market to be able to provide funding. So what is the opportunity for Africa? I know I have a limited time, so please allow me just speak briefly to this. I think the opportunity here for Africa, and when I talk about Africa, I'm talking about all the counterparties that are related and relevant to financing or providing some level of support or the other to the oil and gas sector. I think the opportunity that lies here for us is that we've always typically depended on foreign support. And when I say foreign support, I'm talking about foreign capital, technology, the expertise to be able to explore our natural resources, to be able to monetize them, to be able to operate them. So what is the opportunity here for Africa? The reality on ground in the more mature markets is that the IOCs are exiting. But the good news for Namibia is that with new discoveries like this, we are beginning to see the crowding in of some of these IOCs coming in. So the beauty of this is that while they are exiting in more mature assets or more mature landscapes, there's room for the African enterprises and the African willing collaborators to step in and fill the gap that they are leaving behind. And that is what I mean by the opportunity that exists for us. And institutions like Afreximbank is what I'm going to be talking about next. Our full name is the African Export-Import Bank, and we are tagged Afreximbank. We were created in 1993 under the auspices of the African Development Bank. We were created as a response to the global debt crisis. That is how we were defined in that time. As I go on in my presentation, I'll talk about some of the things that we are doing in recent times. So we are no longer necessarily a reactive bank, but we are now more proactive. And then when the panel session also comes up, my colleague will speak to some of the things we do, some of our interventions in a bit more detail. So Afreximbank, that's who we are and what we are known as. What is our purpose? We were created to bridge the financing gap and to be able to diversify African trade. Our key role is to promote trade between African countries and Africa and the rest of the world. Our reality is this: Africa rarely trades to the quantum that they do with other parties outside of Africa, and we feel that naturally and traditionally that was how things used to be. Before the borders were put, before we were all decimated and considered as countries, we used to do a lot of trade amongst ourselves, but now it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just an opportunity that we just have to seize. There is room and opportunity for Africa to trade more amongst itself, and that's one of the reasons why we were created. We want to bring nuance and substance to that. We want to create enablement. We want to let people know that there is room for Africa to trade with itself. Within regions and outside of regions, there's actually room for trade. Thank you. Now, it would be good for me to just speak briefly about what our legal status is. we have an establishment agreement that is signed by our member countries, and what that does is it accords us a multilateral status. So while yes, we are a developmental financial institution, by virtue of the fact that we have 52 African member banks being members of, being the ones that are our shareholders, and Namibia is one, we are termed a multilateral financial institution. We have a charter that is annexed to our agreement, and it defines our operations, and we are registered under the United Nations Article 102 and also accredited as an African Union institution. As I had said before, we do have 52 member countries. Namibia is one of them, and all of these member countries are shareholders, and they are invested in the bank's equity in 4 different classes that we have. If you want to know a bit more about that, please feel free to resort to any of our social media handles or our website, and you can see a bit more detail, but I'll just move into the substance of the day. Our head office is located in Cairo, Egypt, so I am from Cairo, Egypt, but we have rep offices all across the continent. We have 5 rep offices. My colleague Esther is the country manager for Southern Africa. We have that office in Harare, Zimbabwe. We also have an office in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. We have an office in Abuja, Nigeria. We have an office in Kampala, Uganda, and we have an office in Yaoundé in Cameroon. Our credit rating is on the screen. You can see how we are faring, and then we do have a series of interventions beyond financing that we are able to provide, some of which include the fact that we're a very robust bank, and we have a number of subsidiaries, like I said, that are trying to address some of the gaps that exist on the continent. So while we promote intra-African trade, we are also very industrialization and export development focused. We also have SME incubation schemes. We have platforms where people can come and trade and exchange information, compliance lots and payment platforms. We have a whole suite of information that I will share some with you, and my colleague will also speak to some in the last session. Okay. So the Afreximbank mandate is a differentiated mandate that gives us a developmental focus, and the aim is that we are supposed to return profits to our shareholders. So I said we were created in response to the global crisis, and it was because there was a shrinkage in trade finance liquidity on the continent when all the majors left, when all the major financial institutions exited, and so that was why we were established. We were established exactly 30 years ago. So the charter that has been signed by all our shareholders regulates the governance of the bank, and we are now at the cornerstone of promoting intra-African trade and value-added exports. We do not want our member countries to just monetize their resources by removing it from the ground and just selling. We want there to be value addition. So we want our member countries to also get a lot of the value that exists when our raw commodities are taken out to other parts of the world. We believe that these resources are ours to use. We can monetize them in a way that can add value to the general economic and social welfare of the citizens of our member countries. Okay. And so speaking about that, I just wanted to quickly talk about the areas in which we can collaborate. As an institution, yes, we are able to do fossil fuels because we know that Africa has a lot of natural resources. We do hydro and a lot. So one of the things we do is we provide credit to institutions and our member countries and all the things that have to serve within the value chain there. We do provide risk-bearing instruments which can be guaranteed. So that's indirect financing. We provide advisory services. Just speaking quickly to how we provide our credits, we have 3 platforms. We basically provide credits through guarantees. We provide financing through guarantees, through trade finance, through corporate finance, through projects and export development. Our projects and export development function is very robust. Like I said, we do power, conventional and renewable. So yes, we will do hydro, we do everything that has to do with power or the energy sector. We do fossil fuels like oil and gas. We are very active there. Yes, we do it in a sustainable manner because we know that yes, we need to first of all secure the continent, make sure that we are all able to have the basics that we need to be able to grow our industries to that point where Africa can become a powerhouse also. We have manufacturing in the large and light sector, and so on the back of the light manufacturing, we have industrial parks and the lot. So some of these things that I'm speaking to right now just show you that yes, Namibia has new discoveries in terms of oil and gas assets. We can play a part there. There will be increased production because the withdrawal of liquidity in the more mature markets actually did shrink some of those markets. But with the new discoveries, we're expecting that there will be an increase in the uptake in production for Namibia. We will play a part there. In terms of refining capacity, there was discussion in the House today about the refining capacity, and maybe Namibia does not need to play a role. I actually think that Namibia should position itself. You are 2.5 million people, I do agree. You are not too far from Angola, and there's refining requirements across the entire region. Namibia, take your place. You can be a logistics hub. You can also be a refining hub for the region. Some of the other things we also do, and you have spoken to that, is logistic hubs. Yes, we do. We have an active desk that looks after industrial parks and the lots. So our light manufacturing concerns can help you in terms of logistic hubs and the lots. We do manufacturing. In fact, we are moving into vaccine manufacturing, and I don't know if people are aware that we're part of the vaccine fund, the intervention that took place during the COVID era. We started a scheme in collaboration with our member countries, and we're able to purchase Johnson & Johnson vaccines onto the continent to address the COVID-19 situation. But beyond that now, we want Africa to start producing its own vaccines, so we are no longer at the mercy of anybody outside of the continent. There's something I must say before you take over from me. One of the things I've said before is that we are currently made up of 52 African member countries. But on the back of our interventions and all the things that we've been able to do, which are beyond conventional financing, we've actually extended our membership to the Caribbean committees. So my colleague may speak to that in a few, but right now Afreximbank has signed on the Caribbean committees, countries that are outside of Africa but are joined to us because they were Africans that were probably taken into diaspora and established there. So right now we have extended our membership to Caribbean communities because we do have to make a difference to Africans wherever they are around the world. Our product offerings are this. We provide trade finance, which can be via letters of credit and the lot, and notes purchasing, discounting and the lot. We provide future flow financing and receivables discounting. We provide asset-based financing and project financing. So we do airports, we do seaports, we do infrastructure, rail, the lots. All the major rail projects that have gone on in Africa today, we've been part of that. We do fossil fuels, we do renewables, we do everything that has to help us take Africa forward. We provide trade enabling infrastructure, and we do not shy away from the environmental concerns there. We know that there's a need for us to be sustainable. We do that in a responsible way. We do have a climate finance function and a desk, but the point I'm making is that we need to get Africa to a place where we are able to become industrialized, where we are able to move our resources to export markets and get the full benefits of it. We do that. We also do that in collaboration with our project preparatory and advisory teams, where we are able to provide technical advice and very early funding to be able to make bankability, or we can also help you raise money in the capital and in the equity, debt and equity from the capital markets. Yes, my time is up and our footprint is presented there. So this is our footprint. Today we actually hold about $4 billion, US dollars please, in oil and gas assets. We are very active, I say. I emphasize our activity levels and our interventions. We are proud to be associated with Namibia. We are saying, Namibia, the gateway is open to you. We've heard about financing. If you guys don't know who Afreximbank is, today is the day to know us. As long as you have transactions that we can work with you on, as long as you're ready to work with us on, we are your partner of choice to finance. And by the way, we do not crowd out the commercial banks. We work in collaboration with them. So while we are represented in the 52 member countries, we work with all commercial banks that are willing to work with us. We do not compete, we collaborate. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Our contact details